why is the Bible laid out in the way that it is laid out? And how does that impact how we study it? And so for me, people ask the question a lot. They say, do you study the Bible literally or literarily? And in my view, every book of the Bible can be studied and should be studied literarily according to its literary genre. And then that will impact whether or not we read that passage literally.
Well, welcome back. This is the Jude 3 Project. And I say welcome back because I haven't recorded the episode since November. So I had to take a break. I'm your host, as always, Lisa Fields, the founder and president of the Jude 3 Project. As you can see, we have a new set. I'm so thankful to our set designer Meredith and her assistant Tori for helping, and her mom for helping design this. Meredith is the wife of one of our videographers, Lance. So shout out to them for helping redesign and get our studio set right. I'm so excited. Also, you see me wearing some of our Black History merch. God made me Black on purpose. So if you want that, you can get that at jude3project.org/shop. Without further ado, we have an amazing guest today, someone who is one of the sweetest people I have ever met in my life, Kristie Anyabwile. I always say our last name wrong. I hope I got it right.
You say anything fast, nobody will know but me and you.
Welcome, Kristie. It's an honor to have you with us.
Thank you. No, it's an honor for me. You just have been a blessing to me for a long time, not only through Jude 3, but through our mutual friends and loved ones. So this is just a joy for me to get to spend this time with you. So thank you. And I got to get me one of them shirts.
Yeah. I'll make sure you get one. Before we get into today's interview, just tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm Kristie. I'm sitting here right now in Southeast Washington, D.C. This is where my family and church family, we minister in this area. My husband's a pastor of Anacostia River Church. And our mission as a church is to glorify God from the four corners of the block to the four corners of the globe. So we're active in our community in that way, and I try to be active in that way. I also am a writer, and as a matter of fact, have a new book that just is just on its way out the door. And I write and teach and speak in the area of just spiritual formation, teaching the Bible and biblical principles, training Bible teachers, and of course, leading and training Bible teachers in my local church. So I have 3 children. My oldest is almost 24. She lives with us at home. And my middle daughter, she lives in Chattanooga. And then my son is a teenager, and he's here and in the midst of basketball season right now. And I have a dog. He might make an appearance, or you might hear him a little bit.
Your daughter, Fifi, she helped edit our first curriculum through
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're thankful for you and your family. You have a new book coming out, Literarily. And when I
just came in the mail a couple days ago, super excited.
When I saw the title, it made me think of this quote because it's about biblical genres by Paul Copan. He says, "We don't take the Bible literally; we take it literally."
Yes, love that. Yes.
That was the first time I heard it, and I think it's so fitting because certain parts of the Bible you don't take literal because there are different genres in the Bible. What was kind of the motivating thing behind writing this book?
Yeah, that's a good question, and love that quote. And that's really, that really kind of gets to the question that you're asking. As I was growing and understanding how to even study the Bible, and in particular, how to study the Bible with an eye towards teaching it, I just growing up never really thought so much about genre. honestly, I
Mhm.
didn't even know about genres for a long time. And so when I started learning generally that there were particular genres, and how a genre is basically a category, it's just how you group things together. And so in the Bible, biblical genres are, they help us to read the text appropriately. Um, is it a story? Should it be read as historical fact? Is it a parable? Is it a poetry? Is there lots of are there lots of images and those kinds of things? Is it emotive? What so I think what motivated me to write literarily is actually I was in Bible study with some young ladies, and we were talking about how um, we were going through, I think Esther, or it might have been Ruth, but it was a narrative. And we were going through it, talking about just the plot, the plot line, and going and teaching them about plot arcs and narrative arcs, and how to consider things like the setting and what the rising action is and the climax of the story and how that impacts our understanding. And so I had been learning those principles beforehand. And of course, when we learn things like this as believers or anyone, that we want to pass that on to people that we know. And so they were like, hey, you should write about this. I don't think there's anything out there quite like this. And so for me, it's just a way to bring a different kind of understanding, not different in terms of necessarily new, um, as if it hadn't existed before, but just helping to connect the dots. Why is the Bible laid out in the way that it is laid out? And how does that impact how we study it? And so for me, people ask the question a lot. They say, I mean, do you study the Bible literally or literarily? And in my view, every book of the Bible can be studied and should be studied literarily according to its literary genre, and then that will impact whether or not we read that passage literally, right?
Mhm.
And so if you're reading history, historical narrative, yes, you want to read that literally. If you're reading poetry, then or proverbs, wisdom literature, you can't really read that literally because it's not meant for that. There's a
Mhm.
lot of figurative language, there's metaphor, there's um, images and those kinds of things. And so in that case, you can't read it literally, but you can read it literarily. So every book of the Bible can be read in that way, meaning reading it according to that particular genre, what that genre is meant to, how that genre is meant to help us learn about the plan and the ways of God. And then that will help us to dictate whether or not we read a specific passage, book, or chapter literally.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so important because I think about, one of the books of the Bible that's hard for people is Proverbs, because it's principles, not promises. And
Yes,
so people think, they're like, say something like train up a child in the way they should go when they
exactly.
get old. Then the people have examples of children who departed. And they're like, well, the Bible says. And so helping people to understand something like Proverbs and genre is so crucial because people will throw the Bible away
Yeah.
because they don't understand literary context.
Yeah. I mean, and then it also can really be a it can be a crisis of faith, right?
Mhm,
When you read that passage, for example, and you say, wait a minute, I've trained my child in the way that they should go. So then why is my child currently in this season of waywardness? And so
mhm,
can become a crisis of faith. Like, what's wrong with me and my faith? What
mhm,
excuse me, what's wrong with my child? Or what's wrong with God, right? And
mhm,
we don't want to wrongly um, make assumptions about ourselves or about our children, and definitely not about the Lord Himself. And I think that basic understanding of that's not a promise, that's not a command, is proverbial wisdom. It's generally
mhm,
true, but it's not a guarantee, right? That
mhm,
that will help us a lot spiritually, not to be caught up and kind of potentially put ourselves in a crisis of faith when those things don't turn out the way we thought that they should based on a proverb.
mhm. Yeah, when we think about the genres of the Bible, can you just give our audience kind of the major genres
Yeah.
in scripture?
Yes. Okay. So last time somebody asked me this, I took way too long because I get really excited about it. So I'll try to keep it succinct this time. But so the way I've kind of understood and even laid out literarily is so you have the first 5 books of the Bible. That's the Pentateuch. I'm not going to go through what's in each one of them, but we call it the Pentateuch, or the Torah in Jewish tradition. And Torah just means law, but law not in the way that we think about it today, but law in the way of instruction. So that word Torah literally means instruction. So the first 5 books are God's instructions. What are the commands, the expectations that God has given to his people to teach them how he expects them to live? And so that's the first 5 books. And so those are instructions. Then we get to Old Testament narrative. These are the stories. So in these books, we are looking at how God's people responded to his instructions. So what did they do when with the instructions that God gave? Well, we know what they did. They wilded out, they rebelled, they disobeyed God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we see that played out through the narrative stories. When we look at the books of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, all of those, we go through and we see the unraveling of God's people because they disobeyed his instructions. And so the other thing I want to point out is when we talk about, let's say, so we have narrative books, but there are elements of narrative in other books too. So there's a lot of narrative in Genesis. There's a lot of narrative in a good amount of narrative in Exodus. So it doesn't mean you won't find narrative or stories in those sections. It just means functionally, literarily, those books are meant for kind of a different purpose, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we have those, and then we see in those narrative books that not only do God's people rebel, but you have kingdoms that are completely divided that alter the rest of Israel's history. And so after that, then you get to the prophetic books. So you have the major prophets and the minor prophets. They're scattered. Well, let me go before you get to those. You get to the poetic books, so like the Psalms, for example. And the Psalms are kind of the song books of God's people. And so you get more of, yes, you have instructions. The narrative tell us how God's people responded and kind of their lived experience. But then the poetic books tell us how God's people respond to his law, his instructions in an emotive sense. Like what was their heart posture, their emotions, their attitudes, their demeanor. And it also gives us a little bit of knowledge about, or a lot of knowledge as well about how they understood who they understood God to be in the midst of everything that was happening in their society. Then you get the prophets, and that's more of just warnings, but also glimmers of hope. You get God saying, hey, not only have you have disobeyed my instructions, but there's consequences. And so you see the prophets speaking the word of God to the people of God, warning them again about what would happen if they continue in their rebellion, but also offering them glimmers of hope. But here's what God says: if you obey his instructions, that these calamities won't fall upon you. Of course, we know how that story goes, that the prophets, you have swaths of people who just completely continue in their rebellion and rejection of God. But then God always has a remnant. So we also see that in the midst of that rebellion, the prophets holding out hope for the people of God, that God has not left his people without a witness, and that he will redeem and restore and keep that remnant of people who would continue to proclaim his goodness and to follow and obey him. Then you have, I talked about poetry, wisdom. The wisdom literature is in the poetic realm. Then we move up to the New Testament. We have the Gospels. So now God's instructions are personified in the person and work of Jesus Christ. And so from beginning to end, so we get that part. Let me finish. So then there's the Gospels. Then there's the the epistles, those are the letters, those are instructions for the church, for the New Testament church, as they have understood the work and person of Christ and come to him by faith. Now God's instructions are given to the church as a whole. And then we get to the apocalyptic literature, Revelation and Daniel. So you have one in Old Testament, New Testament, but those the apocalyptic literature tell us about the end, how God's instructions are played out not only to the end of time, but also into eternity as God's people are redeemed and are brought into the heavenly kingdom. Then how his instructions are perfected through as we're glorified with him. And so we see the end, not even the end, but kind of a new beginning. So there's no need in this sense. That God's instructions have now been fulfilled in the person and work of Christ. And now as the people of God glorified with him in the kingdom, we get to enjoy relationship with him forever. And so those are the genres and a little bit about what I think how the story is being woven from beginning to end. And to me, it just paints a picture that from beginning to end, the Bible is one story about one person, and the genres serve to help us to see where we are in that story, where we are in redemptive history, and how it relates to Jesus Christ and our relationship with him and how we should live as God's people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so helpful and a very succinct way to lay it out. One of the things I think is helpful when you think about genres and understanding the genres of the Bible and how the Bible was formed is understanding the difference between what's descriptive and prescriptive. Because we did a recent event for Jude 3 called Problematic Passages, where we had Esau McCauley and Joe Vitale answer questions. And you see this questions come in because people sometimes take descriptive as prescriptive. So if David was a polygamist, then polygamy is okay. People take these kind of views on scripture because they don't understand the difference between descriptive and prescriptive. How would you kind of help a person navigate through as they're reading the Bible, understanding that?
No, that's a good question. Yeah, I think, again, when you're so given that example of Daniel, of David, or even in Daniel, there's examples there. So we think about David. Even people will say, like, you know what, David slayed giants. So then the application is, how are you? What giants are you slaying in your life, or something to that?
Yeah.
And sometimes we put ourselves in the wrong place in the story, and instead of understanding the story as describing how God's people responded to his instructions, and therefore how do we respond to his instructions, we take those things as kind of like command or prescriptive, like this is how we should live. But I think what the narratives are doing, for example, they are telling us the story of God's people and how they respond to his instructions, but we need to make sure we put ourselves in the right place in the story. So in the story of David, for example, let's say David and Goliath, we always want to be David, right? We want to be the one that's slaying the giant. But in actuality, if we are the ordinary Israelite. So David is, he's our Christ figure, right? And so in David, we see not a pattern for us, but we see a glimpse of a king, and how that king, how that king kind of rules and how people respond to that king. We know any human king is fallen. I'm not saying he's perfect, but I'm just saying we get these glimpses, we get these pictures, and they are supposed to point us to a greater king, the greater King Jesus Christ. And so that's not us. We're not David. We would be an ordinary Israelite. So we would be those people who need to be reminded of the God of heaven, and need to be reminded not to be fearful, and need to be reminded to obey the commands of the Lord. And so I think sometimes that will help us as well, to know, just knowing who we are and where we are in the story, then that will better help us to apply and to know whether or not this is prescribed, command, this you must do, or is it giving us a description and then telling us, okay, now how then must you live in light of that? Who are you in this story, and then how do you live in light of that? So for me, that's kind of been a helpful practice as well.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful.
Yeah.
What was your favorite chapter to write, and why?
Oh, my favorite chapter. That's a hard question. Um, I like narratives.
Mm-hmm.
I like story for a couple of reasons. One, there's tons of narrative in the Bible. About half the Bible almost is narrative, and there's a huge portion that's poetry as well. Um, but I think I like it because you get to see people's lives, and you get to see I don't know, there's just a lot of drama, there's a lot of tension, there's and I'm the kind of person who, I'm that person who likes like historical fiction, so I like to read that kind of information too. I like to learn
Mm-hmm.
history through people's lives. So I think in the narratives, it gives me an opportunity to do that. It gives me an opportunity to learn about um, the Lord and his ways, but also learn about biblical characters, and and just kind of take a dip into their lives. So I enjoyed that. I also enjoy writing it because I was able to make some kind of modern day, well, I wouldn't even say analogies that I thought were
Mm-hmm.
really fun. So y'all know Will Smith just came out with his new biography.
Mm-hmm.
I have a little Will Smith reference in there. That was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just enjoy writing that one. And I love history. I love historical fiction. I love biographies. I love learning history through people's lives. So that was just fun for me. Yeah.
Awesome. What do you hope that people take away from this?
Thank you. I hope that people not that they would learn tools that would help them to read their Bibles better, and to understand how a specific genre or book or chapter or even passage fits into the greater narrative of the whole Bible. Um, but I hope that in using those tools and in seeing those things, that it would draw us closer to Christ. I just am not an academic person, and I love people who have that bent, but this isn't an academic exercise merely. Bible study is a way for us to connect with the Lord. It's a way for
Mhm,
us to fellowship with Him. It's a way for us to commune with Him. And so, in giving tools and resources and strategies, those kinds of things, they're not meant to be an end in and of themselves. They're meant to free us so that we can read the Bible well and really enter into communion and fellowship with the Lord. Not merely to kind of have a fun academic exercise and we feel like we know a lot, but we haven't connected with God. And so he's weaving a story, and I want people to be able to see what that story is, and just to be loving the Lord more deeply and obeying him more fully as we get closer and closer to glory.
mhm. So, we want everybody to get the book. When does the book come out?
March 1st.
So, you
Yes.
got, 2 more weeks. I is
Yes.
it 2 full weeks? Yeah.
It's about, yep, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it'll be available wherever books are sold.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Wherever books are sold, from your Walmart to your Amazon to your wherever you like to buy books.
And
Also,
they can
there's another
pre-order.
fun thing.
Oh
Eventually, I'm sorry.
oh, I was saying, can they pre-order now?
Yes, of course. They can
Okay.
pre-order now. That's really helpful, and that would be a blessing. But also, eventually, the audiobook is going to be coming out at some point. And I had the joy of having my husband to narrate it. And if anybody knows or has met my husband, he has that Barry White. So I'm excited to have him to narrate the book for us and make it easy for us to listen and understand.
Well, it's so great to have you on. I encourage everybody to go pre-order the book. I know pre-orders help tremendously. Let's get that on the Amazon chart. So definitely pre-order the book literarily. I'm excited about it. Thank you so much for joining us. What are your social media handles? How can people get in contact with you?
Well, if you can figure out how to spell my name, first name, last name, I'm on, Facebook and Instagram that way, and then first initial, last name on Twitter. But I'm mostly on Instagram, so you can find me there. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been
Thank
a joy to
you.
have you.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank y'all for watching another episode of the Jude 3 Project podcast. Remember, you can subscribe wherever you stream your favorite podcast. Make sure to rate and leave a comment, share, subscribe to us on all our social media platforms at Jude 3 Project. You can get our curriculum through Eyes of Color. We have a new curriculum coming out that I'm excited to tell y'all about called Courageous Conversations. We'll have more details on that soon. You can take an online course, get merch, all at Jude3project.org. Remember, we have the Pastors and Leaders Conference coming up, Preaching in the Culture. You can register for that. We have an amazing lineup. We have Dr. Charles Goodman, Brian Loritz, myself, Quaniqua Day, Esau McCauley, Charlie Dates. All the folks are coming to help us talk about the issues in culture and how to navigate through them for pastors and leaders. So you don't want to miss that. You could register at preachinginculture.com. We had our problematic passages, which was amazing. If you haven't seen it, you can watch the replay. And all the things are at jude3project.org. Remember, you can become a monthly partner by hitting that donate tab. You can give online or you can give by the mail. We're helping you to know what you believe and why you believe it. Until next time, grace and peace and God bless.